Amina had never imagined her life would twist into something this heavy. She grew up believing that if she worked hard, stayed respectful, and kept faith in good people, things would stay steady. For many years, that belief seemed true. She married young, moved into her husband's family home, and tried her best to fit into their world. She helped her mother-in-law in the kitchen, cared for the animals in the small yard, and set aside her own dreams to keep harmony in the household. She would tell herself that patience was the safest path in a home where she wasn't born but was still expected to belong. Her husband, Fahad, was the calm center of her days. He was soft-spoken and thoughtful, the kind of man who noticed when she was tired and quietly brought her a cup of tea without making a big gesture out of it. They had plans, or at least the beginnings of them. They talked about building a small house someday, away from the main family. A place where they could make their own decisions. They dreamed of planting fruit trees, raising goats, maybe even starting a small shop. But life doesn't always follow the stories people imagine for themselves. One ordinary morning, Fahad didn't wake up. There was nothing leading up to it. No warning, no signs of sickness. Amina shook him gently, first with confusion, then with fear, until she finally called out for help. By the time the rest of the family gathered around him, it was clear that he was gone. Amina felt something inside her break silently. She didn't cry loudly. She just sat next to him in shock, unable to understand how someone so warm could suddenly become so still. People from the village came to offer prayers, and then, as often happens, they returned to their own lives. Amina stayed behind with a home that suddenly felt colder in every corner. After the funeral, things began to change in ways she didn't expect. At first it was subtle. Her mother-in-law became distant, avoiding eye contact. Her father-in-law spoke to her only when necessary. The small kindnesses she once relied on simply disappeared. Amina understood that grief affects everyone, so she tried not to take their coldness personally. But then the whispers began. A broken cup in the kitchen became her fault. A minor argument between siblings somehow became tied to her presence in the house. If an animal fell sick, someone would glance at her with suspicion. She waited for things to settle, telling herself it was just a phase born from pain and confusion. Instead, the pressure only increased. Her brothers-in-law started deciding how she should spend her days. They took her sewing machine, claiming they needed the table. Her small savings, which she kept from her needlework, were taken for household needs. She wasn't invited to family discussions anymore. She wasn't even asked what she needed. As though she had become invisible in the home she once worked so hard to maintain. The village wasn't any easier. People talked. They always talked. Some said she brought bad luck. Others whispered that she should leave and return to her parents. But Amina didn't want to go back home as a burden. She had dignity. Even if no one else seemed to see it. She kept quiet, thinking silence would calm the storm. The storm didn't calm. One afternoon, her mother-in-law accused her of speaking disrespectfully, even though Amina had only asked whether she should prepare dinner early. The argument grew quickly, louder and sharper, until the brothers-in-law gathered. Amina stepped back, noticing their expressions. Something was different this time. Something heavier than anger. They told her she was becoming a problem, that her presence brought constant tension, that the village was starting to talk too much. Amina tried to explain, tried to remind them that she had always stayed respectful, but they didn't want explanations. That evening, they told her to pack a few clothes. She hesitated, unsure of what they planned, but their voices left no room to question. They weren't shouting. Their calmness felt even more unsettling. She collected her things quietly, placing them in a small cloth bundle. When she stepped outside, the sky was already turning deep blue, and the wind was cold. Her in-laws stood waiting, their postures stiff. Without giving her a choice, they began walking, signaling for her to follow. She kept close, confused and anxious, trying to understand where they were heading at this hour. The path they chose was unfamiliar. It led away from the main houses, past the small market, and toward the far end of the village where an old wooden structure stood. People called it the Gallows, not because it was ever used for punishment, but because of its tall, strange frame that had once been part of a storage shed before decaying into something eerie. Children avoided it, adults ignored it, and no one had any reason to go near it at night. Except now, her in-laws were leading her there. Amina felt her heartbeat rise. She tried to ask where they were going, but no one answered. They just kept walking, their steps firm and fast, as though they didn't want to give her a moment to think. By the time they reached the structure, the air felt heavy. The moon was rising, casting long shadows across the ground. The wooden beams looked even more intimidating under the dim light. Amina felt a chill run through her, not from the night, but from the sharp silence around her. Her mother-in-law stood in front of her, eyes filled with cold disappointment. One of her brothers-in-law stepped closer, saying she needed to learn a lesson for causing trouble in the house. Amina tried to reason with them, insisting she had done nothing wrong, but her words were swallowed by the night. They didn't listen. They didn't want to. Her legs grew weak. She wasn't in danger, but she felt deeply threatened by their behavior. Their anger. Their decision to drag her out here, away from everyone. She wondered if they wanted to frighten her into leaving permanently. She wondered if they wanted to push her into giving up everything that belonged to her husband. She wondered how much more she could take. As they moved closer to her, blocking her escape, Amina's eyes welled up. She held back tears because crying in front of them would only make her seem weaker. She looked around desperately, hoping for someone to pass by, someone who might notice what was happening. That was when she saw a man standing at a distance. He looked like a ranch worker, tall and steady, carrying a small bag over his shoulder. His clothes were dusty from the day's labor. He wasn't approaching, just observing quietly, like someone trying to understand the situation before stepping in. For a moment, Amina thought she was imagining him, but then he took a slow step forward, his expression calm but alert. Her in-laws noticed him too, and turned sharply. The brothers-in-law exchanged a look. Annoyed by the interruption, the stranger didn't say anything yet. He simply stood there, his presence a quiet challenge. His eyes moved from Amina to the others, reading the tension in the air the way a farmer reads clouds before a storm. Amina felt a small flicker of hope, faint but real. For the first time that night, she realized she wasn't completely alone in this dark corner of the village. Someone had seen her. Someone had noticed something wrong, and maybe, just maybe, someone was willing to step forward. Harris was not the kind of man who liked drama or unnecessary conflict. He preferred quiet days, caring for his cattle, repairing fences, and watching the sunset from his ranch porch. He had seen families argue before, but something about this scene felt different. The fear in Amina's eyes was unmistakable. It wasn't the fear of a simple argument, it was the fear of someone who felt alone. The moment he stepped forward, the atmosphere shifted. The in-laws stiffened, annoyed by his presence. Amina stood silently, her hands clasped together, not knowing whether to hope or to worry. Harris calmly greeted the group and asked what was going on. His tone wasn't rude or loud, it carried a firmness that demanded a clear explanation. Her father-in-law stepped ahead, insisting again that it was a private matter. But Harris didn't move. He kept his eyes steady on Amina, as though trying to understand what she couldn't speak aloud. When he spoke again, his voice was slightly firmer. He asked them why they had brought her to such a lonely place and why she looked so upset. Amina's mother-in-law tried to respond with vague statements about discipline and family honor, but the words sounded forced. They claimed Amina needed to be reminded of her responsibilities, that she had caused trouble in their home, that they were simply guiding her. Harris listened quietly, but his expression didn't soften. Something in their explanation didn't sit right with him. He shifted his attention to Amina and gently asked her if she was okay. She opened her mouth slightly, wanting to answer, but the presence of her in-laws made her hesitate. She feared saying anything that could be used against her later. Her voice came out shaky when she said she just wanted to go home. Harris noticed the discomfort in her tone. He knew enough about people to recognize when someone wasn't speaking freely, so he stepped closer, placing himself between Amina and the in-laws, not in a confrontational way, but in a protective, steady posture. He reminded the family that no one had the right to treat another person harshly, especially someone who was already going through emotional pain. His voice was calm, but each word carried weight. Her in-laws exchanged irritated looks. They argued that Amina was their responsibility, but Harris countered gently by saying every person had dignity. He added that if Amina wished to leave with him for safety, he would ensure she reached a place where she felt protected. His offer startled them. They hadn't expected someone to stand up for her. Amina felt tears welling up, but she blinked them away quickly. She had not cried in front of anyone for months, but hearing even a few kind words after such a long time felt overwhelming. For a moment, she wondered why a stranger cared more about her well-being than her own family-in-law. Her brother-in-law stepped forward in an attempt to intimidate Harris, but Harris did not react. He remained steady, grounded, and calm, like someone who had faced bigger storms in life. This quiet confidence unsettled the in-laws more than any loud argument could have. Finally, realizing they were drawing unwanted attention and losing control of the situation, the in-laws released their grip on Amina. They muttered a few warnings at her, trying to maintain their authority, but their words held less power now. They walked away slowly, still glaring at Harris but unwilling to push further. Amina stood alone now, trembling slightly as the group disappeared down the path. Harris turned toward her gently and asked if she was hurt. She shook her head, but her breathing was uneven. He encouraged her to take her time, allowing her space to calm down. After a few minutes, he asked if she had somewhere safe to go. Her silence gave him the answer. She didn't want to return to the house she had just been dragged from. Her heart felt too fragile to go back to a place that no longer felt like home. Harris understood this without needing many words. He offered her shelter at his ranch, mentioning that his mother was kind and that she would be welcomed there without judgment. Amina hesitated. She had never stepped beyond her in-laws' world since marriage. Going with a stranger felt uncertain, yet staying where she was felt impossible. Harris assured her he wasn't forcing anything, he simply didn't want her walking back alone in her shaken condition. His words were simple but sincere. Finally, Amina nodded slowly. They walked together toward the ranch. The path was quiet, the fields stretching wide on both sides, and the sky slowly turning golden as the afternoon sun moved toward evening. Harris didn't ask her too many questions, understanding she needed time to process everything. He simply walked beside her, allowing the silence to remain gentle rather than heavy. When they reached the ranch, Harris's elderly mother stepped out to see who had arrived. She immediately sensed Amina's exhaustion. With a warm smile, she invited her inside and offered her water. Amina felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief. Kindness was something she had almost forgotten existed. Harris explained that Amina needed a safe place for a while. His mother nodded without hesitation. They made a small space for her in a quiet room, placed a blanket on the bed, and told her she could rest as long as she needed. Amina sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the softness of the sheets and the peacefulness of the room. It was the first moment in a long time when her mind wasn't filled with fear or accusations. That evening, Harris came by to check on her. He didn't pry but told her she wasn't alone anymore. If she wanted to share anything later, she could. If she wanted help, he would help. If she wanted silence, he would respect it. For the first time since losing her husband, someone had given her choices. Amina lay down that night and closed her eyes. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know what her in-laws would do next. She didn't know how the village would react. But one thing she knew for certain: her life had just taken a turn she never expected, and all because one stranger decided not to walk away. And somewhere deep inside, she felt a new sense of courage quietly beginning to grow. Amina woke up early the next morning at the ranch, long before the sun had fully risen. She opened her eyes slowly, almost unsure if she was really in a safe place, or if it was just another short dream that would disappear as soon as she blinked. But when she looked around and saw the simple wooden room, the soft blanket, and the quiet morning light slipping in through the window, she finally believed it. She was no longer in her old house. She was somewhere peaceful. For a long moment, she just sat on the bed, listening to the stillness. She could hear faint sounds from outside, birds beginning their morning calls, the soft rustle of leaves, and the distant sound of someone moving around the ranch. It felt different than the noise she was used to. There was no shouting, no harsh commands, no footsteps full of anger. Just calm. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in many months, it didn't feel heavy. After washing up, she stepped outside. The air was fresh, cool, and clean. The sky was painted with colors of early dawn, soft pinks, pale yellows, and hints of blue. She saw Harris near the stable, already busy feeding the animals. His movements were steady and practiced. Beside him, a few workers were preparing tools and checking supplies. When he noticed her, Harris offered a gentle smile. "Good morning," he said simply, as if he had been waiting to make sure she felt welcomed the moment she stepped outside. Amina nodded politely, still feeling shy but grateful. "Good morning." His mother soon joined them, carrying a small tray with tea. She greeted Amina warmly and encouraged her to drink before breakfast. The kindness in the older woman's voice made Amina feel emotional for a moment, but she quickly wiped her eyes before anyone noticed. She wasn't used to people speaking to her gently, but she liked it quietly, almost secretly. She liked it a lot. After breakfast, Harris showed her around the ranch. He didn't force her to do anything, he simply explained things, telling her she could help if she wanted to, or rest if she needed to. But Amina insisted she wanted to help. Doing nothing made her feel guilty, as if she were a burden. Helping made her feel a little stronger. He taught her how to fill the animal feeders, how to check the water troughs, and how to arrange the supplies in the storage shed. The tasks were simple, but each one gave her a small sense of achievement. The ranch workers were polite too. They didn't question her presence. They didn't whisper behind her back. They treated her like someone who belonged there. Every once in a while, her mind drifted back to her old home. The looks her in-laws gave her. The blame they threw at her. The fear she felt every day. The memories tried to creep back like shadows, but each time she looked around the peaceful ranch or heard Harris's steady voice, the shadows faded. By afternoon, she felt tired but not drained. It was a good kind of tired, the kind that comes from honest work. Harris noticed and asked her to sit down while he finished the last task. She sat on a wooden bench near the fence and watched the animals grazing quietly. The world seemed so wide and calm here. Later that day, Harris invited her to his mother's small kitchen garden behind the house. The older woman had planted herbs, vegetables, and flowers. She showed Amina how to water the plants gently and how to check which leaves needed trimming. Amina felt unexpectedly peaceful among the plants. The colors, the scents, the soft soil, it all felt healing. In the evening, when the sun began to set, painting the sky in stunning shades of orange and gold, Amina found herself standing quietly near the fence, watching the horizon. The air felt warm, the sky looked endless, and for the first time in a long time, she believed maybe her life wasn't ending, maybe it was beginning again. Harris walked up beside her, not too close, just enough to let her know she wasn't alone. "You can stay as long as you need," he said softly. "You don't have to rush anything." Amina looked at him, surprised. "But I don't want to cause trouble for you," she said, her voice small. "You aren't causing trouble," he replied calmly. "Everyone deserves safety. Everyone deserves peace." His words touched something deep in her heart. She didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded. Over the next few days, Amina slowly began opening up. She told Harris bits and pieces of what she had gone through, not everything at once, but enough for him to understand the weight she had been carrying. He listened patiently. He didn't interrupt or question her. He didn't react with anger or pity. He simply listened, and that alone felt like healing. One afternoon, after finishing some ranch work, Harris sat with her under the shade of a large tree. He asked whether she had considered reporting her situation to the authorities. Amina hesitated at first. The idea scared her. She had lived so long under fear that she never imagined she could stand up for herself. But Harris wasn't pressuring her. He said she could take her time. He promised to stand by her if she chose to take action. He told her she wasn't alone anymore. Later that night, Amina lay awake, thinking about what he had said. She remembered every moment when she had wished someone would defend her. Someone would believe her. And now there was someone willing to do exactly that. Someone brave enough to step forward. Someone kind enough to stay. The next morning, with a voice that shook slightly but held determination, she told Harris, "I want to file a complaint." He nodded with quiet approval. "Whenever you're ready, we'll go." Together, they visited the local office. Amina felt nervous, but Harris's steady presence gave her confidence. She told her story honestly, without exaggeration, without bitterness, just truth. The officers took her statement seriously, and because Harris stood as a witness, they gave her assurance that her concerns would be investigated. Amina felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief. She had spoken for herself, really spoken, and people had listened. When they returned to the ranch, the workers greeted her with gentle smiles. Even though they didn't know the details, they could tell she had taken a brave step. Harris's mother hugged her lightly and said she was proud. Days passed, and Amina continued learning new things at the ranch. She began to enjoy taking care of the animals. She found comfort in simple tasks, cleaning the stable, arranging hay, brushing the horses. The animals didn't judge her. They didn't bring up her past. They accepted her as she was. Slowly, her confidence returned. She stood taller. She spoke more clearly. Her laughter, which had been silent for months, began to return in soft, cautious moments. One evening, after finishing the day's work, she sat outside, watching the sky turn deep blue. Harris joined her with 2 cups of tea. They sat quietly, sipping their tea, watching the first stars appear. "You've changed," he said gently. Amina smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm finding myself again." "You never lost yourself," he replied. "You were always strong. You just needed a place to remember it." Amina looked at him, and for the first time, she felt something warm grow inside her. Not love exactly, she wasn't ready for that, but trust, gratitude, respect. Maybe the beginning of something new. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't afraid anymore. The ranch had become a place where she could breathe, heal, and learn who she truly was. And Harris had become someone who showed her that kindness still existed, hope still existed, and courage sometimes came from the most unexpected places. Amina realized that she was no longer the quiet, frightened woman she had been weeks ago. She was stronger now. She was standing on her own feet. She was becoming someone who believed in her own worth. And this was only the beginning of her journey. Amina had always been a quiet, gentle woman who believed that kindness could soften anyone's heart. She lived in a small village where everyone knew everyone else, where one person's joy became the entire village's celebration, and one person's sorrow felt like a shared burden. But after the sudden passing of her husband, her life began to feel like a story she no longer recognized. Her in-laws, who once treated her with basic respect, began looking at her with cold eyes. They blamed her for things she had never done, but she kept silent, thinking that time would heal everything. Days passed, then weeks, and the atmosphere around her started changing in a way she could not ignore anymore. They began taking small things from her, like her jewelry, her clothes, and even the little savings her husband left behind. They said they needed the money for the household, and she didn't argue. She thought it was her responsibility to support the family, but slowly she realized that nothing she did ever pleased them. If food burned even slightly, they blamed her. If the weather changed, they muttered things under their breath. If a visitor came and left early, they hinted that she must have said something wrong. Amina tried harder every day. She cooked earlier, cleaned more carefully, and spoke less, thinking maybe silence would protect her. But silence didn't protect her. It pushed her deeper into a lonely corner. One morning, she overheard her mother-in-law talking to a neighbor, saying, "She brings trouble with her presence. Ever since she came, our luck has turned." Hearing those words broke something inside Amina. She stood behind the door, holding her breath to stop herself from crying loudly. She wished someone would believe her side of the story just once. Rumors began spreading in the village. each one more painful than the last. People who once smiled at her now avoided eye contact. Some whispered in hushed tones as she walked by. She felt her world shrinking smaller every single day. Then came the day that changed everything. It started like any other afternoon. Amina was sweeping the courtyard when her brother-in-law walked toward her with an unusual expression. His voice was firm when he said, "You need to come with us. There are things we need to settle today." Before she could ask what he meant, her mother-in-law came out too, nodding with a stern look. Amina felt her heart tightening, but she didn't argue. She followed them quietly, hoping it was just another lecture or accusation she could listen to and endure. But the moment they stepped out of the yard and headed toward the outer edge of the village, her hands began trembling. They weren't taking her to talk. They were taking her somewhere she had never been with them before. They walked her toward an old, abandoned wooden structure that villagers jokingly called the Gallows because of its shape and eerie appearance. It used to be a place where farmers hung tools, ropes, and old harnesses. Over time, it became something children were afraid of because of its dark, lonely environment. Amina's steps grew heavier as her in-laws walked faster, almost dragging her along. She tried asking, "Where are we going? Why are we going here?" But they didn't answer. They didn't even look at her. Her heart pounded louder with every step. She felt as though the air around her was disappearing. She didn't know what her in-laws intended, but she knew it wasn't anything kind. When they reached the structure, they stopped. Her mother-in-law finally turned and gave her a cold look filled with frustration and blame. "You have caused us enough trouble. Today, you will understand what it means to listen." Amina tried to speak, tried to reason, but her voice came out weak and shaky. She felt surrounded, helpless, and alone. She wished someone, anyone, would understand her pain. At that moment, far across the field, a man noticed the scene. He was walking back toward his ranch after a long day of work. His name was Harris, a quiet and independent rancher known for helping others when necessary but never interfering in village conflicts. As he walked closer, he sensed something unusual. The way Amina stood, the fear on her face, and the stern expressions of her in-laws didn't look normal. Something told him that this was not just a family matter, it was a moment where silence could cause more harm. He watched for a few seconds, trying to understand what was happening. And then he made a decision that would change not only Amina's day, but her entire life. He stepped forward, his footsteps echoed softly on the dry ground, and the in-laws turned sharply toward him. Harris raised a hand as if asking for calm, and his steady voice carried a confidence that made even Amina look up with hope. He didn't know the full story. He didn't know why they brought her there. But he knew one thing: no one should be treated with fear or humiliation. And that was the moment everything began to shift. Like clouds parting after a long storm. Part 2 expanded is approximately equal to 1,500 words. No heading. Harris wasn't a man who liked getting involved in problems that weren't his. Living on a ranch had taught him to value peace, personal space, and fairness. But he also had a strong sense of right and wrong, something instilled in him by his father. When he saw Amina standing there with lowered eyes, her hands trembling slightly, something in his heart pushed him forward. As he approached the group, the air grew tense. The in-laws exchanged annoyed glances, clearly unhappy to be interrupted. Amina, still frightened, looked from one face to another, unsure of what was going to happen. Harris stopped a few steps away and said in a calm, even tone, "Is everything all right here?" Her mother-in-law was the first to respond, her voice sharp. "This is a family matter. You don't need to interfere." Harris nodded slightly, but his eyes stayed focused on Amina. "I understand, but she looks uncomfortable. I just want to be sure no one is being hurt." Her brother-in-law frowned, stepping forward. "We told you. This is our problem. Please go your way." But Harris stood firm, not aggressively, just steadily, like someone who would not be pushed aside easily. His voice remained peaceful. "You're forcing her to follow you. She looks frightened. If she wants to leave, she should be able to." Amina felt a strange warmth spreading through her chest. For months, she had felt invisible, unheard, unseen, and misunderstood. But now, someone was speaking for her. Someone who didn't know her, didn't owe her anything, and didn't belong to her world, was protecting her with nothing but courage and fairness. Her mother-in-law scoffed. "She is our daughter-in-law. We can talk to her however we want." Harris shook his head lightly. "You can talk to her. Yes. But fear is not the way. If she's shaking, if she's clearly uncomfortable, then something is wrong." For the first time, her in-laws hesitated. They didn't expect anyone to challenge them, especially not someone like Harris, a man respected for his independence and strength. Amina's voice came out faintly. I just want to go home." Those simple words changed the entire atmosphere. Harris stepped slightly closer to her, not touching her, only positioning himself like a shield. "She has spoken. She wants to leave." Her brother-in-law tried to argue again, but his voice wasn't as confident as before. "This is all a misunderstanding." Harris nodded. "If it is, then let her walk freely. Misunderstandings don't require being brought here." There was silence. Amina's hands slowly unclenched. For the first time in months, she felt a sliver of safety. Her heart stopped pounding so loudly as she watched her in-laws, realizing that they could no longer act without being questioned. Finally, frustrated and uncomfortable under Harris's steady gaze, they stepped back. "Fine," her mother-in-law said stiffly. "If she wants to leave, let her." But there was no softness in her tone, only irritation. Amina didn't know what to do next. She stood frozen, overwhelmed by fear and confusion. Harris noticed and gently said, "Come with me. You're not safe right now." Why? She didn't want to cause trouble, but she also didn't want to stay with her in-laws at that moment. Something deep inside her told her that following Harris was the better choice. Slowly, she nodded. Her in-laws glared at Harris and warned him, "You'll regret interfering." He didn't respond to their threat. He simply looked at Amina and said, "You're safe now. Let's go." They walked away quietly. The sound of their footsteps faded, leaving her in-laws standing behind in frustration and disbelief. Amina kept her head down as she followed Harris. She felt ashamed, scared, and grateful all at once. She worried about what people might say if they saw her with him. She wondered how she would ever face her village again. But she also felt a peace she hadn't felt in months. When they reached his ranch, she expected to feel uncomfortable. But Harris's mother opened the door with a warm smile and immediately asked, "Is everything all right? You look tired, dear." Amina's eyes filled with tears she had been holding in for far too long. Harris's mother took her inside gently, offering her water and a place to sit. She didn't ask too many questions. She simply said, "You're safe here. Rest." Amina felt something she hadn't felt in months, a sense of kindness without judgment. From that day forward, her life took a new turn. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear. Someone had stepped forward when she needed courage the most. Someone she had never met before. And that changed everything. Part 3, expanded, is approximately equal to 1,500 words. No heading. Amina's first morning at the ranch felt like waking up from a long, unsettling dream. The sun filtered gently through the curtains. The soft sound of animals echoed outside. And for the first time in many months, she felt no shouting, no tension, no footsteps waiting to criticize her. Harris's mother knocked softly on the door. "My child. Breakfast is ready. Take your time." Amina whispered a shaky, "Thank you." Simple kindness suddenly felt overwhelming. She washed her face and looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes looked tired, but there was something else too, something like hope, though she was afraid to fully trust it. When she stepped outside, she saw the ranch workers beginning their daily routines. Some carried feed buckets, others cleaned the stables. The environment felt busy but peaceful. No raised voices, no blaming, no cold stares. Harris greeted her with a small nod. "Good morning. I hope you slept well." She nodded, unsure how much she should speak. "Thank you for everything." "You don't owe me thanks," he replied gently. "You needed help. Anyone would have done the same." But she knew that wasn't true. Many people had seen her struggle, but no one had stepped forward before. Harris's act of courage was rare. At breakfast, Harris's mother encouraged her to eat. "You look like you haven't had a proper meal in weeks," she said with care, not criticism. Amina ate slowly, her eyes occasionally watering. She wasn't used to being treated with kindness. After breakfast, Harris asked her, "If you feel comfortable, can you tell me what's been happening?" Amina hesitated, but his voice held no pressure, only concern. She began speaking softly, explaining how her life changed after her husband's passing. She described the growing hostility, the blame, the rumors, and how she was slowly pushed into silence. She didn't use any harsh words and avoided describing anything harmful. She simply told her story in a gentle way, focusing more on how it made her feel. Harris listened quietly, never interrupting. His mother occasionally placed a hand on Amina's shoulder, offering comfort. When she finished, Harris said calmly, "You shouldn't go back until things are sorted. You need protection." Amina agreed quietly. In the following days, she began helping at the ranch. She liked working with the animals because they never judged, never questioned, and never compared her to anyone. They simply accepted her presence. Harris taught her how to feed the goats, how to refill water for the horses, and how to organize the barn. Little by little, her hands that once trembled began to steady. Her steps, that once felt heavy, became lighter. Her eyes that once looked at the ground finally began to rise. The workers noticed her transformation. One of the women said, "You work hard. You must have gone through a lot." Amina smiled shyly. She didn't share details, but she appreciated the kindness. One afternoon, Harris approached her and said, "I'm going to the village office to discuss your rights. If we want to fix things, we must do it officially." Amina felt nervous. "Will it cause problems?" "Not if we follow the law," he said calmly. She nodded, trusting his judgment. With the help of the village officials, Harris helped her file a statement. She didn't write anything harsh, only facts: how she had been treated unfairly after her husband's passing, and how she felt unsafe returning home. Harris told the officials, "I witnessed her being taken away forcefully. She was scared. That is enough reason to investigate." The officials agreed. News of Amina's presence at the ranch spread through the village. Some people whispered, some showed sympathy, and some judged. But Amina no longer felt defeated by their words. She had found a place where she could breathe again. Every evening, she walked around the ranch, watching the orange sunset reflect on the fields. She felt her strength returning slowly, like a plant recovering after a season of drought. Harris's mother grew fond of her, treating her like a daughter. Sometimes, she told Amina stories of her own younger days, reminding her that every difficulty eventually passes. One night, as Amina helped prepare tea, Harris said quietly, "You're stronger than you realize." Amina smiled, a soft and genuine smile. "Maybe, but I didn't feel strong before." "That's because you were alone," he said. "When someone stands beside you, strength becomes easier." His words stayed with her. For the first time, she believed she wasn't weak at all. She was simply overwhelmed by a situation that no one should face alone. And now, with support and safety, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Part 4 expanded is approximately equal to 1,500 words. No heading. The investigation into Amina's situation began quietly. Village officials visited her in-laws' home, asking questions and reviewing her statement. Her in-laws tried to explain things in a way that made them seem innocent, but their story didn't match the facts. Their irritation showed through their words, and their behavior raised even more suspicion. Meanwhile, Amina stayed at the ranch, unsure of what the future held. But each day, she grew more confident. She woke early, helped with morning chores, and learned new tasks. The ranch felt like a place where her heart could heal. One afternoon, an official visited the ranch to speak with Harris. Amina listened from the side as they discussed the case. The official said, "Your testimony is important. You were the only one who saw what happened that day. Harris replied simply, I saw her afraid. That's all I needed to know. The official nodded. His tone softened when he turned to Amina. You acted bravely. It takes courage to speak up. Amina lowered her eyes shyly. I just want peace. We will make sure you get it, the official said. Within a few weeks, the inquiry reached a conclusion. The officials ruled that Amina had been treated unfairly and granted her legal protection. She was allowed to reclaim her belongings and her share of property from her late husband. Her in-laws were warned to stay away from her unless she willingly chose to meet them. They didn't like the decision, but they could do nothing to change it. The village elders, who previously believed rumors, quietly changed their tone. Some approached Amina in the market when she returned to collect her things. They spoke kindly, offering apologies or blessings. Amina accepted their words gracefully. She wasn't the type to hold grudges, but going back to her in-laws' home was no longer an option in her heart. She wanted a new beginning, one built on peace, not fear. After collecting her belongings, she returned to the ranch with a calm smile. Harris's mother hugged her warmly. Welcome back, she said. You look lighter today. Amina nodded. I feel lighter. With her legal matters settled, she began dreaming about her future. She had a small piece of land, and some savings returned to her. She thought about starting a small business, maybe a tiny home bakery, a sewing shop, or a vegetable garden that could supply the village. Harris encouraged her. You have talent and determination. Whatever you choose, it will work. His confidence gave her strength. Over the next few weeks, Amina made plans. She visited the market to check prices, asked neighbors for advice, and even drew simple maps of how she wanted to organize her new space. The ranch had become her temporary home, but her dreams had begun spreading their wings. One evening, as the sun set behind the rolling fields, Amina stood on a small hill overlooking the ranch. The warm colors of the sky reflected in her eyes, and the wind gently brushed against her face. Harris walked up beside her quietly. Thinking about the future? He asked. She smiled softly. Yes. For the first time. I feel like I have one. He looked at her with respect, not pity, not sympathy, but genuine admiration. You made it through a difficult storm. You should be proud. I'm grateful, she said. For you and your mother. Without your help. She paused, searching for the right words. I don't know where I would be today. Harris shook his head gently. You would still be strong. We just helped you see it. His words touched her heart. Amina watched the horizon, her heart full of hope. She felt stronger, more confident, and more determined than ever before. The pain she had lived through had not broken her, it had shaped her into someone braver. Her story no longer felt like a tragedy. It felt like a new beginning, and she knew that the day a stranger stepped forward had changed everything, but the courage to rise again had always been hers.